The richest woman in Arizona was begging him to sleep with her, and Ethan Cole said no. Not because he didn't want her, not because she wasn't devastatingly beautiful, but because something in her eyes looked too much like drowning, and Ethan had learned the hard way that you can't save someone who's already decided to sink. That refusal should have been the end of their story. Instead, it became the beginning of a scandal that would destroy her billion-dollar empire, ruin his quiet life, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is tell a desperate person the truth. If you want to see how badly this decision wrecked both of their lives, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this mess has traveled. Ethan Cole had stopped believing in miracles around the same time his daughter learned to walk. That was 3 years ago, back when he still thought hard work and decency actually meant something in the real world. Back when he believed showing up every day, paying bills on time, and being a good father would somehow add up to a life worth living instead of just a life worth surviving. He'd been wrong about a lot of things. Now, at 32 years old, Ethan's daily routine looked exactly like it had yesterday and would look exactly the same tomorrow. Wake up at 6. Make breakfast for Maya. Drop her at daycare. Spend 9 hours cold calling strangers to sell them insurance they didn't want. Pick Maya up. Microwave something resembling dinner. Read her the same 3 bedtime stories she'd memorized months ago. Collapse into bed. Repeat. The apartment they rented in central Tucson had thin walls, a broken air conditioner that the landlord kept promising to fix, and a persistent smell of cigarette smoke drifting up from the unit below. Maya's bedroom was barely big enough for her twin bed and the plastic dresser Ethan had bought at a yard sale. His own room contained a mattress on the floor, a lamp, and a pile of unpaid medical bills from when Maya had pneumonia last winter. Nothing about Ethan's life was tragic in any dramatic way. It was just small, forgettable, the kind of existence that disappears into statistics about middle-class struggle and single-parent households. He'd made peace with that, or at least he told himself he had. "Daddy, why don't we ever go anywhere fun?" Maya asked one Thursday evening while Ethan was reheating leftover spaghetti. She was 5 years old, with dark curls that never stayed in the ponytail he attempted every morning, and eyes that saw through his bullshit with alarming accuracy. "We go places," Ethan said, not looking at her. "We went to the park last weekend." "The park doesn't count. It's free." "Since when do you understand economics?" "Since you keep telling me we can't afford things." Ethan set the bowl of pasta down harder than he meant to. "Maya, eat your dinner." She poked at the noodles with her fork, frowning. "Mommy used to take me to fancy restaurants." Something cold settled in Ethan's chest. "Your mom left when you were 2. You don't remember any restaurants." "I remember her saying you weren't good enough." The fork in Ethan's hand bent slightly under his grip. He'd known this conversation was coming eventually. Kids overheard things, absorbed things, turned half-understood fragments into weapons they didn't realize would cut so deep. "Your mom said a lot of things," Ethan replied carefully. "Most of them weren't true. But that one was?" "Finish your spaghetti." Maya went quiet after that, which was somehow worse than the questions. Ethan stared at his own untouched plate and tried not to think about the woman who'd walked out of their lives 3 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a speech about wasted potential. He'd been 29 then, working the same insurance job he had now, living in a slightly worse apartment, believing that love and stability would be enough. Turned out, it wasn't. "You don't have any ambition," she'd told him the night she left. "You're fine with being nobody. I'm not." She'd moved to California 6 months later, sent birthday cards for Maya twice, then stopped. Last Ethan heard, she was engaged to someone who owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. Good for her. He didn't think about it anymore. Except on nights like this, when Maya's questions dragged everything back to the surface and reminded him that no matter how hard he worked or how much he loved his daughter, he would always be the guy who wasn't good enough. The invitation appeared at work 3 days later. Ethan almost threw it away without opening it. It came in a cream-colored envelope with gold embossing, addressed to Ethan Cole and guest, which was hilarious because Ethan didn't have guests. He had a 5-year-old daughter and a coworker named Dennis, who sometimes shared his lunch. "What the hell is this?" Dennis asked, peering over Ethan's shoulder at the card inside. "You are cordially invited to the Sinclair Foundation, Annual charity gala benefiting children's healthcare initiatives across Arizona. Saturday, November 14th, 7 p.m., the Biltmore Estate, Scottsdale. Black tie optional. It's a mistake, Ethan said flatly. Dude, that's the Sinclair Gala. Do you know how exclusive that is? People pay 20 grand a plate just to get in the door. Then they definitely sent this to the wrong person. Dennis grabbed the envelope and squinted at the address label. Nope, says your name right here. I don't know anyone named Sinclair. Everyone knows the Sinclairs. Victor Sinclair basically owns half of Arizona's tech infrastructure. His wife, Vanessa, is like a literal billionaire CEO. She's on magazine covers and shit. Ethan vaguely remembered seeing a headline once about some tech company merger. He'd scrolled past it to read an article about meal prepping on a budget. Why would they invite me? Ethan asked. Dennis shrugged. Maybe you're a quota thing. You know, diversity, single dad, working class struggle, makes their donor base feel good about themselves. That's depressing. That's philanthropy. Ethan was about to toss the invitation in the trash when Dennis snatched it out of his hand. Are you insane? You have to go. I absolutely do not. When's the last time you did anything that wasn't work or parenting? Last Tuesday. I went to the grocery store. That doesn't count. It was exciting. They had a sale on chicken. Dennis gave him a look that was equal parts pity and frustration. Ethan, buddy, you're 32 years old and you live like someone's depressed uncle. Just go to the stupid gala, drink free champagne, eat food you can't pronounce, pretend to be someone interesting for one night. I don't have anything to wear. Rent a tux. I don't have money to rent a tux. I'll lend you money. I can't afford to pay you back. Then consider it a gift. Seriously, man, you need this. Ethan stared at the invitation for a long moment. The gold lettering caught the fluorescent office light and seemed to mock him with its elegance. He thought about Maya asking why they never went anywhere fun. He thought about his ex-wife saying he had no ambition. He thought about the medical bills on his bedroom floor and the broken air conditioner and the 3 years he'd spent in survival mode without ever stopping to wonder if he was actually living. Fine, Ethan said. I'll go. Dennis grinned. There's hope for you yet. The Biltmore estate in Scottsdale looked like something out of a movie Ethan couldn't afford to see. String lights wrapped around palm trees. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, each one worth more than Ethan would earn in 5 years. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in gowns that probably cost more than his rent stood in elegant clusters, laughing at jokes Ethan wouldn't understand. He'd borrowed a suit from Dennis that didn't quite fit right. The shoulders were too tight, the pants were too long. He looked like someone playing dress-up, and everyone here could tell. Name? The woman at the entrance asked without looking up. Ethan Cole. She scanned her tablet, frowned slightly, then nodded. Welcome, Mr. Cole. The main ballroom is through the foyer and to your left. Cocktail hour is currently in progress. Ethan stepped inside and immediately regretted every decision that had led him here. The foyer alone was larger than his entire apartment. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. A live string quartet played something classical in the corner. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked too artistic to actually eat. Ethan grabbed a glass of champagne mostly, so his hands would have something to do. He recognized exactly no one. Fragments of conversation drifted past him as he moved awkwardly through the room. Just closed a Series C round, 40 million. Summer house in Sedona, but honestly, the bugs told him if he couldn't commit to the Mediterranean diet, I was done. Ethan drained his champagne and grabbed another. This had been a mistake, a stupid, humiliating mistake. He didn't belong here. These people existed in a completely different universe, one where money was a game instead of a constant low-grade panic attack. He was about to leave when he saw her. She stood near the far windows, backlit by the setting sun, wearing a dress that looked like it cost more than Ethan's car. Even from across the room, she was striking in a way that made his brain go briefly offline. Dark hair pulled back from her face, posture so perfect it looked painful, diamonds at her throat that caught the light with every breath. Vanessa Sinclair. He recognized her from the news articles Dennis had shown him. Billionaire tech CEO, wife of Victor Sinclair, one of the most powerful women in Arizona, and she looked absolutely miserable. Ethan wasn't sure why he noticed. Maybe it was the way she stood slightly apart from everyone else. Maybe it was the mechanical smile she wore while nodding at whatever the man beside her was saying. Maybe it was the way her hand kept reaching for the champagne glass on the nearby table, like she needed it just to keep standing. Their eyes met across the ballroom for less than 2 seconds. Then someone stepped into Ethan's line of sight, and the moment broke. First time at one of these things? Ethan turned to find a man in his 50s, expensive suit, holding a scotch and wearing the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. That obvious? Ethan asked. You look like you're at a funeral instead of a party. Same thing, different clothes. The man laughed. I like you. I'm Richard. I run a venture capital firm downtown. Ethan, I sell insurance. Ah, one of the charity cases. It wasn't said with malice, just casual fact, which somehow made it worse. Something like that, Ethan replied. Richard gestured toward the crowd with his glass. The Sinclairs throw this thing every year, tax write-off disguised as altruism. Everyone here donates just enough to feel morally superior while writing it off their taxes. It's all performance. You seem pretty cynical for someone who showed up. I'm honest. Different thing entirely. Ethan glanced back toward the windows, but Vanessa Sinclair had disappeared into the crowd. You know them? Ethan asked. The Sinclairs? Everyone knows the Sinclairs. Victor's a shark, built his empire by swallowing smaller companies whole. Vanessa's the brains behind most of their tech innovations, but Victor's the face. He's better at the ruthless CEO persona. And her? Richard's expression shifted slightly. Vanessa's complicated. Brilliant, obviously, but she married into a prison disguised as a penthouse, and everyone pretends not to notice. Before Ethan could ask what that meant, a microphone squealed to life at the front of the ballroom. Victor Sinclair stood on a small stage, smiling with practiced charm, one hand raised to quiet the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us tonight. Ethan stopped listening. His attention had snagged on Vanessa Sinclair, who now stood beside her husband on stage, still wearing that mechanical smile, still looking like someone had hollowed her out and replaced her insides with glass. Victor's hand rested on her lower back. Not affectionate, possessive. Ethan didn't know these people, didn't know their marriage or their lives or their problems, but something about the way Vanessa stood there, perfectly composed and utterly empty, made his chest feel tight. The speech ended with polite applause. Dinner was served. Ethan found his assigned seat at a table near the back, surrounded by strangers who politely ignored him. The food was absurdly fancy. Ethan had no idea what half of it was. He ate quietly and tried not to think about how much this single meal cost compared to his weekly grocery budget. After dinner, the crowd dispersed into smaller groups. Some people moved toward the open bar. Others gathered in clusters to network and make deals disguised as friendly conversation. Ethan stepped outside onto the terrace for air. The night had gone cold. String lights glowed softly overhead. Tucson sprawled in the distance, a blanket of light stretching toward mountains he couldn't see. You look lost. Ethan turned. Vanessa Sinclair stood a few feet away, champagne glass in hand, still wearing that devastating dress and that exhausted smile. Up close, she was even more striking. But there were cracks in the perfection now, smudged mascara at the corner of one eye, tension in her jaw, fingers gripping the champagne stem too tightly. I am lost, Ethan said honestly. I don't know why I'm here. That makes two of us. She moved to stand beside him at the railing, staring out at the city below. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Do you ever feel like you're watching your own life from the outside? Vanessa asked quietly. Like you're performing a role someone else wrote and you forgot how to stop pretending? Ethan glanced at her. Yeah, every day. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. What's your name? Ethan Cole. You're not one of Victor's business contacts. No, I sell insurance. I think I'm here as a diversity token. A ghost of a real smile crossed her face. At least you're honest about it. Seemed easier than pretending I belong. Vanessa took a long sip of champagne. No one here belongs. We're all just pretending we're not miserable. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. Before he could figure it out, Victor Sinclair appeared in the terrace doorway. Vanessa, we have donors waiting. His tone was pleasant. His smile was pleasant. But there was something underneath it that made Ethan's shoulders tense instinctively. Vanessa's entire posture changed. The exhaustion disappeared behind a mask of perfect composure. Of course, she said smoothly. I'll be right there. Victor's gaze flicked to Ethan for half a second, dismissive and cold, before he turned and walked back inside. Vanessa set her champagne glass down on the railing. It was nice meeting you, Ethan Cole. You too. She started to leave, then hesitated. If I asked you to take me somewhere else right now, she said quietly, not looking at him, would you? Every instinct in Ethan's body screamed yes, but he'd learned the hard way that desperation doesn't care about consequences, that saving someone who's drowning usually just means you both go under. No, Ethan said. Vanessa turned to look at him, and for the first time all night, her expression was completely unguarded. Shock, hurt, something that looked almost like relief. Why not? Because you don't actually want to leave. You want someone to tell you it's okay to stay. Her breath caught. That's cruel. It's honest. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Vanessa straightened, pulled the mask back into place, and walked inside without another word. Ethan stood alone on the terrace for a long time after that, staring at the city lights and wondering if he'd just made the right decision or the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't expect to hear from her again, but 3 days later his phone rang with an unknown number. Hello? Ethan Cole? He recognized her voice immediately, smooth, controlled, trying hard not to sound as desperate as she probably felt. This is Ethan. It's Vanessa Sinclair. I know this is strange, but I need to ask you something. Ethan sat down on the edge of his mattress, heart pounding for reasons he didn't entirely understand. Okay. Why did you say no? On the terrace? Yes. Ethan exhaled slowly. Because sleeping with you wasn't going to fix whatever's broken in your life, and you knew that. You were just hoping I didn't. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, you're right. I usually am. A sound that might have been a laugh. That's very arrogant. Or very observant. Another pause. I'd like to meet you for coffee, Vanessa said. Just to talk. No expectations, no anything else. Why? Because you're the first person in years who's told me the truth instead of what I wanted to hear. Ethan thought about his daughter, his job, his small, forgettable life that didn't have room for complications like this. He thought about Vanessa Sinclair standing on that terrace, looking like the loneliest person he'd ever seen. Okay, Ethan said. Coffee. He could hear the relief in her voice. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might hate what I have to say. I doubt that. She was wrong, but Ethan didn't tell her that. They met 2 days later at a coffee shop in Tempe, far enough from Scottsdale that no one would recognize her. Vanessa walked in wearing jeans, a plain sweater, and sunglasses that covered half her face. She looked like someone trying very hard to be invisible. Ethan was already sitting at a corner table with 2 black coffees. You didn't ask how I take my coffee, Vanessa said, sliding into the seat across from him. I figured you'd tell me if it was wrong. She took a sip. It's perfect. Lucky guess. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Vanessa pulled off her sunglasses and set them on the table. Without makeup, without the armor of wealth and beauty, she looked younger, tired, human. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Do what? Talk to someone without a script. You just did. A small smile. I suppose I did. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. Why are you really here, Vanessa? I told you, I wanted to talk. About what? She stared down at her coffee. About what happens when you spend so long being what everyone else needs that you forget who you actually are. Ethan didn't say anything. I built an empire, Vanessa continued quietly. I'm on Forbes lists. I get invited to speak at conferences. People call me a visionary, and I wake up every morning feeling like I'm suffocating. Why? Because none of it was ever mine. It was always his. Victor's. She nodded. I met him when I was 23. I'd just graduated from Stanford with degrees in computer science and business. I had ideas, plans. Victor had money and connections. We were supposed to be partners. But you weren't. No. Somewhere along the way, I became an accessory, the brilliant wife who makes him look smarter, the beautiful CEO who photographs well at charity events. I stopped being a person and started being a brand. Ethan took a sip of his coffee. So leave. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Just leave, as if it's that simple. It is that simple. Hard, but simple. You don't understand what you're asking me to give up. I understand exactly what I'm asking you to give up, Ethan said quietly. Money, status, security, a life that looks perfect from the outside. What I'm asking is whether any of that is worth more than your sanity. Vanessa's hands tightened around her coffee cup. He controls everything, she whispered. My schedule, my image, who I talk to, where I go. He says it's protection, brand management, but it's a cage, Ethan, a very expensive, very beautiful cage. Then break it and lose everything I've worked for? You've already lost everything. You just haven't admitted it yet. Her eyes flashed with anger. You don't know anything about my life. You're right, I don't. But I know what it looks like when someone's given up on themselves. And that's what I saw at the gala. Someone who stopped fighting a long time ago. Vanessa stood abruptly, grabbing her sunglasses. This was a mistake. Probably, Ethan agreed. But you'll call me again anyway. She froze, hand on her purse, staring at him with something between fury and desperation. You're an asshole. Frequently. I don't need your judgment. No, you need someone to tell you the truth. There's a difference. Vanessa stood there for another long moment, trembling slightly, looking like she wanted to scream or cry or both. Then she turned and walked out without another word. Ethan sat alone at the table, finishing his coffee, and wondered how many more times they'd have this exact conversation before something finally broke. She called again 4 days later. Ethan was in the middle of a sales call when his phone buzzed with the same unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, finished convincing a retired teacher that she needed supplemental life insurance, then listened to the message during his lunch break. It's me. Vanessa's voice sounded different, smaller. I'm sorry about the coffee shop. You were right. I wasn't ready to hear it. Can we try again, please? Ethan stared at his phone for a long time before calling her back. Where? He asked when she picked up. Anywhere you want. There's a park near my place, Desert Botanical Garden. It's quiet. When? Saturday, 2 o'clock. I'll be there. She hung up before he could change his mind. Maya was with her grandmother that Saturday, which meant Ethan actually had a few hours to himself. He almost canceled 3 times on the drive over, convinced this was a terrible idea that would only end badly for everyone involved. But Vanessa was already there when he arrived, sitting on a bench near the entrance wearing the same attempt at invisibility as before. Jeans, plain shirt, sunglasses, hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look less like a billionaire CEO and more like someone's exhausted older sister. You came, she said when she saw him. So did you. They walked through the gardens without talking much at first. The afternoon sun beat down hard, turning the air thick and heavy. Saguaro cacti stretched toward the sky like ancient sentinels. Tourists moved past them in small clusters, snapping photos and complaining about the heat. I used to come here when I first moved to Arizona, Vanessa said eventually, before everything got complicated. I'd sit near the butterfly pavilion and sketch. Sketch what? Anything, plants, people, ideas for sculptures I wanted to make someday. She smiled faintly. I was going to be an artist. That was the plan. What happened? Victor happened. Business school happened. Success happened. She shrugged. I told myself I could do both. Build the company and still make art. But you can't serve 2 masters. Eventually you have to choose. And you chose wrong. I chose what made sense. Art doesn't pay for penthouses and private jets. But it might have made you happy. Vanessa stopped walking and turned to face him. You say things like that so easily, like happiness is something you can just decide to prioritize. It is. Not when you have responsibilities, employees, investors, a husband whose entire empire depends on you staying exactly where you are. Then you're not his wife, you're his employee. Her jaw tightened. It's more complicated than that. It really isn't. They kept walking. Vanessa's phone buzzed multiple times in her purse, but she ignored it. Victor called this morning, she said after a while. Asked where I was going, who I was meeting. He does that now, tracks my location through my phone, says it's for security. That's not security, that's surveillance. I know. So why do you let him? Because fighting him is exhausting. Because every time I push back, he finds a way to remind me how much I need him. The company, the reputation, the life we built together. She paused. He's not cruel, Ethan. He doesn't hit me or scream. He's just suffocating, like living underwater. Ethan thought about his ex-wife, the way she'd slowly eroded his sense of worth until he believed her narrative that he was small and forgettable and not enough. You know it's abuse, right? He said quietly. Even if it doesn't look like the kind you see in movies. Vanessa's breath caught. Don't call it that. Why not? Because if I admit that's what it is, then I have to admit I've been letting it happen for years, that I'm weak, that I'm human, Ethan interrupted. You're human, that's all. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her expression cracked open. Why are you being kind to me? I'm not being kind. I'm being honest. There's a difference. Most people can't tell the difference anymore. They found another bench near a cluster of ocotillo plants and sat down. Vanessa pulled off her sunglasses and rubbed her eyes. Without them, she looked fragile in a way that wealth and beauty couldn't hide. Tell me about your life, she said. The real version, not the sanitized one. Ethan leaned back and stared up at the cloudless sky. It's not interesting. I don't care. Tell me anyway. So he did. He told her about Maya, about working 60-hour weeks just to cover rent and daycare, about his ex-wife leaving because he wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't impressive enough, wasn't enough, period. About learning to microwave dinner and read the same bedtime stories and pretend he wasn't drowning in the kind of quiet desperation that never makes headlines. I stopped dreaming about anything bigger than making it through the week, Ethan said. That's what poverty does. Not the dramatic kind you see in documentaries, just the slow, grinding kind that turns your entire life into damage control. Vanessa listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. Do you resent her? She asked finally. Your ex-wife? Sometimes. Mostly I just feel sorry for her. Why? Because she's chasing something that doesn't exist. She thinks money and status will fill whatever's missing inside her, but it won't. It'll just make the emptiness more expensive. Vanessa flinched like he'd hit her. That's what you think I'm doing, isn't it? She stood abruptly and walked a few steps away, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something together. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. I look in the mirror and see someone I don't recognize. Someone who smiles on command and says the right things, and performs perfectly for cameras and investors, and a husband who stopped seeing me as a person years ago. Then stop performing. And be what instead? A failure? A scandal? The billionaire who walked away from everything because she couldn't handle the pressure? Or the woman who finally chose herself? Vanessa turned to look at him, tears running down her face now, mascara smudging at the corners. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. It's just not easy. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing the mascara worse. I don't know how to do this. How to be honest. How to want things for myself instead of just existing. Start small. Tell me one thing you actually want, not what Victor wants, not what makes business sense, just you. Vanessa was quiet for a long time. I want to make art again, she said finally. I want to get my hands dirty with clay and not care if it ruins my manicure. I want to create something that doesn't have a profit margin or a target demographic, something that's just mine. Then do it. It's not that simple. It literally is. Find a studio, buy some clay, show up. That's it. And what about Victor, the company, everything I'd be risking? What about them? She stared at him like he'd suggested setting her mansion on fire. You're asking me to blow up my entire life. I'm asking you to start living one. Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Her phone buzzed insistently in her purse. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her whole body tensed. I have to go, she said. Victor's asking where I am. So tell him. I can't. Why not? Because he'll make it into something it's not. He'll accuse me of having an affair or losing my mind or undermining the brand. He'll turn one afternoon into a crisis. Then let him. Let him lose his mind while you go make art. Vanessa looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. I'll call you, she said finally, already walking toward the parking lot. Will you? She stopped and turned back. Yes, I will. Ethan watched her disappear into a black luxury SUV that probably cost more than he'd earn in his lifetime. He sat alone on the bench for another 20 minutes, wondering what the hell he was doing and why he couldn't seem to walk away from someone else's disaster. The answer, he suspected, was that Vanessa Sinclair reminded him of himself 3 years ago, standing at the edge of drowning and too proud to admit she couldn't swim. 3 weeks passed. Vanessa called twice during that time, once to apologize for leaving so abruptly, once to tell him she'd looked up art studios in Phoenix and hadn't worked up the courage to visit any of them yet. Ethan listened without judgment and didn't push. Pushing never worked with people who were already running from themselves. Then, late one Thursday night, his phone rang at almost midnight. Ethan? Her voice sounded wrong, tight, scared. What happened? Can you meet me? Right now? Where are you? Underground parking garage, my house. I can't go inside right now. Vanessa, please, I just need someone to talk to. Someone who isn't him. Ethan was already grabbing his keys. Send me the address. He broke at least 4 traffic laws getting to Scottsdale. The Sinclair estate sat behind iron gates and manicured hedges, the kind of compound that looked more like a museum than a home. Vanessa had texted him a code for the side entrance, and the gate rolled open silently as he approached. The underground parking garage was bigger than Ethan's entire apartment building. Luxury cars lined the walls. Vanessa sat on the concrete floor near a white Tesla, still wearing the dress from whatever event she'd attended that evening. Her makeup was smudged, her hair had come loose from whatever elaborate style it had been in. She looked destroyed. Ethan sat down beside her without saying anything. We had a donor dinner tonight, Vanessa said eventually. Some tech venture capitalist Victor's been courting. The man kept touching my arm, making comments about my dress. Victor laughed, told him I clean up nice. Jesus. I smiled, played along, said all the right things, and when we got home, Victor told me I'd done well, like I was a trained dog who'd performed a good trick. Her voice broke on the last word. I can't do this anymore, Ethan. I can't keep pretending I'm fine, that this is normal, that I'm not dying inside every single day. Ethan didn't touch her, didn't try to fix it, just sat there and let her fall apart in the cold fluorescent lighting of a parking garage that costs more than most people's houses. He monitors everything, Vanessa continued. My emails, my calendar, my phone. He says it's protection, brand management, making sure I don't say or do anything that damages our image. She laughed bitterly. I built this company. I wrote half the code for our flagship product, but I can't even post on social media without his approval. That's not a marriage, Vanessa. That's a prison. I know. I've known for years. I just kept telling myself it was temporary. That once the company stabilized, once we hit certain benchmarks, things would get better. But they never do. He just finds new ways to keep control. So leave. And go where? Do what? I haven't been my own person in almost a decade. I don't know how to exist without someone telling me what to do. Then learn. She turned to look at him, eyes red and face blotchy from crying. You make it sound so easy. It's not easy. It's terrifying. But it's possible. What if I fail? What if I walk away and realize I'm nothing without him? Without the company? Without all of this? Then you'll be nothing. So what? Being nothing is better than being trapped. Vanessa stared at him for a long moment, something like hope flickering in her expression. I don't think I've ever met anyone like you, she said quietly. Someone who tells you the truth? Someone who doesn't want anything from me. That landed harder than Ethan expected. He thought about his daughter sleeping at home, about the life he'd built from nothing after his ex-wife left, about how easy it would be to want something from Vanessa Sinclair, her money, her connections, her desperation. I'm not a good person, Ethan said. Don't make me into some kind of hero. You're better than most. That's a low bar. She almost smiled. They sat in silence for a while. Somewhere above them, the massive house hummed with quiet wealth. Climate control, security systems, everything money could buy except peace. I looked up a studio, Vanessa said suddenly. In Mesa. It's small, nothing fancy. They offer open sculpting sessions on Wednesday nights. Are you going to go? I don't know, probably not. Victor would notice the gap in my schedule. So tell him you're at a business dinner. I've never lied to him before. Maybe that's the problem. Vanessa pulled her knees up to her chest, looking young and lost in her expensive dress. Will you come with me? She asked. To the studio? Just the first time, so I don't lose my nerve. Every rational part of Ethan's brain screamed this was a terrible idea, that getting more involved meant more risk, that he had his own life and his own problems and couldn't afford to get tangled up in someone else's marriage implosion. But he thought about her face at the gala, about the mechanical smile and empty eyes, about what it felt like to be trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt like suffocation from within. Yeah, Ethan said. I'll come with you. Relief flooded her expression. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might hate it. I doubt that. She was wrong about a lot of things. But about this, she might be right. Vanessa stood and brushed off her dress. I should go inside. Victor will wonder where I am. Tell him you were on a phone call. He'll ask who. Make someone up, an investor, a board member, whatever sounds believable. She nodded, but didn't move toward the elevator. Ethan? Yeah? Why are you helping me? He thought about that for a moment, about his ex-wife, about Maya, about the 3 years he'd spent in survival mode, and the slow realization that staying alive wasn't the same thing as living. Because someone should have helped me when I was drowning, he said finally. And no one did. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears again. I'm sorry that happened to you. Me too. She walked toward the elevator, heels clicking on concrete, shoulders squared like she was preparing for battle. The doors slid open. She stepped inside and turned to face him. Wednesday, she said. 7 o'clock. The studio's called Desert Clay. It's on Main Street in Mesa. I'll be there. The elevator doors closed, and Ethan was alone again in the underground garage with its rows of expensive cars and cold fluorescent lights. He sat in his beat-up Honda for a long time before starting the engine, trying to figure out when exactly he'd stopped being careful and started giving a damn about someone else's broken life. The answer, he suspected, was the moment Vanessa Sinclair looked at him like he was the only honest thing in her entire manufactured world. Wednesday came faster than Ethan expected. He dropped Maya at her grandmother's house with a vague excuse about a work meeting, then drove to Mesa feeling like he was about to make a mistake he wouldn't be able to take back. Desert Clay Studio sat between a coffee shop and a vintage furniture store, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. The building was old brick with large windows and a hand-painted sign that had seen better days. Vanessa was already inside when Ethan arrived, standing near the registration desk looking completely out of place. She wore jeans and a plain t-shirt, her hair pulled back, no jewelry, no makeup. She looked terrified. You came, she said when she saw him. I said I would. I wasn't sure you meant it. I don't say things I don't mean. A woman in her 60s with clay-stained hands and paint-splattered overalls approached them with a warm smile. First time? She asked Vanessa. Yes. Is it that obvious? You have the look. Half excited, half convinced you're going to fail spectacularly. The woman extended a hand. I'm Ruth. I run this place. Open sculpting sessions are pretty casual. Grab some clay, find a spot, and just see what happens. No pressure, no judgment. Vanessa shook her hand, looking slightly less terrified. Thank you. Your husband joining you? Ruth asked, glancing at Ethan. He's not my... Vanessa started, then stopped. He's a friend. Well, friend, you're welcome to watch or join in. We've got plenty of clay to go around. Ethan settled into a chair near the window while Vanessa approached the clay station with the careful hesitation of someone approaching a wild animal. The studio was filled with people of all ages, working on various projects. An older man was hand-building a massive vase. A teenage girl sculpted what looked like a dragon. Two women in their 40s laughed while attempting pottery wheels. No one cared about anyone else. No one was performing. No one was trying to be impressive or important or perfect. Vanessa sat down at an empty table, a lump of clay in front of her, staring at it like she'd forgotten what to do. Ruth appeared beside her. Start simple. Just touch it. Feel the texture. Remember what it's like to make something without a plan. Vanessa pressed her thumbs into the clay tentatively. Then she pressed harder and harder. Her hands started moving faster, shaping and molding without clear direction. Clay stuck under her fingernails. Dust covered her forearms. She stopped looking nervous and started looking focused. Ethan watched her transform. For 2 hours she worked without stopping, without checking her phone, without glancing at the clock or worrying about schedules or wondering what Victor would think. She was just present. When the session ended, she had created something abstract and imperfect. A twisting form that didn't represent anything specific but somehow felt urgent and alive. It's terrible, she said, staring at her creation. It's yours, Ruth corrected. That's what matters. Vanessa looked at Ethan, eyes bright with something he hadn't seen before. I forgot what this feels like, she said. What? Creating something just because I wanted to. Not because it had market value or brand potential or investor interest, just because it mattered to me. They walked out into the cooling evening air, Vanessa still covered in clay dust, looking happier than Ethan had ever seen her. Thank you, she said, for coming with me, for not thinking this was stupid. It's not stupid. It's the first real thing you've done in years. She smiled, a real smile, not mechanical or performed or carefully managed. I'm coming back next week, she said. With or without you. Good. They stood in the parking lot for a moment, neither quite ready to return to their separate lives. Victor's going to find out eventually, Vanessa said quietly. He monitors my location. He'll see I wasn't where I said I was. Then tell him you were here, at an art studio, making sculpture. He'll think I'm losing my mind. Maybe that's what sanity looks like after years of pretending. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. You're dangerous, Ethan Cole. How so? Because you make me believe things might actually change. Before he could respond, her phone buzzed insistently. She glanced at the screen and her expression shifted. I have to go. I know. She started toward her car, then turned back. Same time next week? If you want. I do. She drove away in her luxury SUV, leaving Ethan standing in the parking lot wondering how much longer they could keep this up before everything exploded. The answer came sooner than either of them expected. Victor Sinclair showed up at Ethan's apartment on a Tuesday morning. Ethan was making breakfast for Maya, still half asleep, when someone knocked on the door with the kind of sharp precision that suggested they weren't going away. He thought maybe it was the landlord finally fixing the air conditioner, or Dennis stopping by before work. It wasn't. Victor stood in the hallway wearing a suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, looking exactly like what he was, a man used to getting whatever he wanted through sheer force of presence. Ethan Cole? Yeah? I'm Victor Sinclair. I believe you know my wife. Ethan's stomach dropped, but he kept his face neutral. She mentioned you. I'm sure she did. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. May I come in? I think we should talk. Every instinct told Ethan to slam the door, but Victor wasn't asking. He was informing. Give me a minute. Ethan turned back to the kitchen where Maya was eating cereal and watching cartoons. Baby, can you go play in your room for a bit? I need to talk to someone about work. But I'm watching. Maya, please. Something in his tone made her listen. She grabbed her bowl and disappeared down the hall, casting one suspicious look at the stranger in the doorway. Ethan stepped outside and closed the door behind him, arms crossed. This is far enough. Victor glanced at the cramped hallway, the peeling paint, the flickering fluorescent light overhead. His expression was carefully blank, but Ethan could read the judgment underneath. "I'll be direct," Victor said. "I know you've been meeting with Vanessa, the coffee shop in Tempe, the botanical gardens, that art studio in Mesa she thinks I don't know about. She's an adult. She can meet whoever she wants. Of course she can, but you should understand what you're involving yourself in." "And what's that?" "A marriage. A business partnership worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A carefully managed public image that benefits thousands of employees and investors." Victor's voice remained pleasant, reasonable. "Vanessa is fragile right now. She gets these episodes sometimes. Emotional instability. It runs in her family." "That's bullshit." "Excuse me?" "She's not unstable, she's unhappy. There's a difference." Victor's smile tightened. "You've known my wife for what, a few weeks? I've been married to her for 8 years. I think I understand her mental state better than you do." "Then why are you here?" "Because I'm concerned about her, and because I'm concerned about what happens when people take advantage of those episodes." The accusation hung in the air between them. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "I'm not taking advantage of anyone." "Then what exactly are you doing? Playing therapist, savior? Or are you hoping that if you're patient enough, a billionaire will eventually notice you're available?" "Get the hell out of my building." "Mr. Cole." Victor's voice dropped lower, more controlled. "I don't know what Vanessa has told you about our marriage, but I can assure you it's more complicated than whatever narrative she's constructed. She has a tendency to dramatize, to seek validation from inappropriate sources when she's feeling vulnerable." "You mean when you make her feel like shit?" "I mean when she forgets how much I've sacrificed to build the life we have, the opportunities I've given her, the platform I've provided for her talents." Victor stepped closer. "She was brilliant when I met her, still is, but brilliance without structure becomes chaos. I've spent years keeping her grounded, focused, protected from her own worst impulses. By controlling every aspect of her life? By managing a brand worth more than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes." They stared at each other in the dingy hallway, tension crackling between them. "I'm not trying to destroy your life, Mr. Cole," Victor continued, his tone shifting to something almost sympathetic. "I'm trying to protect my wife's mental health and my company's reputation. Vanessa needs stability right now, professional help, not some insurance salesman playing amateur psychologist." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice. Friendly advice." Victor pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. "If you care about Vanessa's well-being, you'll step back and let the people who actually know her handle this." He held out the card. Ethan didn't take it. Victor set it on the floor between them and walked toward the elevator. "One more thing," he called back. "Vanessa has expensive tastes and complicated needs. I'd hate to see you get hurt when you realize you can't give her what she actually wants." The elevator doors closed. Ethan stood in the hallway for a long time, heart pounding, before picking up the business card and tearing it into pieces. He called Vanessa immediately. It went to voicemail. He called again an hour later. Still nothing. By that afternoon, he was convinced something was wrong. He texted her. No response. Then, just after dinner, his phone finally rang. "Don't call this number again." It was Vanessa's voice, but wrong, flat, rehearsed. "I appreciate your concern, but I need to focus on my marriage and my mental health right now. Please respect that." "Vanessa, what?" The line went dead. Ethan stared at his phone, dread settling in his chest like ice. He didn't hear from her for 3 weeks. During that time, Ethan tried to convince himself it was for the best, that he'd done what he could, and now Vanessa needed to figure out her own life, that getting more involved would only make things worse for everyone. But the silence ate at him. He thought about her face in the parking garage, destroyed and desperate, about the way she'd looked at the art studio, finally coming alive for the first time in years, about Victor's cold smile and calculated threats. Then, late one Friday night, there was a knock on his door. Ethan opened it, expecting Maya's grandmother dropping her off early. It was Vanessa. She looked like she'd aged 5 years and 3 weeks. No makeup, hair pulled back messily, wearing jeans and a hoodie that was probably expensive but looked like something she'd thrown on without thinking. Her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. Can I come in? Ethan stepped aside without a word. Maya was already asleep, so they sat in the cramped living room with its secondhand furniture and unpaid bills scattered on the coffee table. Vanessa stared at the bills for a moment, then at the peeling wallpaper, the broken air conditioner, the entire obvious poverty of Ethan's life. Victor came to see you, she said. Yeah. He told me he was worried I was having an episode, that you were taking advantage of my vulnerability, that I needed to cut contact before I did something I'd regret. And you believed him? I wanted to. It would have been easier if you were just some opportunist trying to get close to money. She finally looked at him. But you're not, are you? No. I filed for divorce this morning. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Ethan's mind went blank for a second, then raced to catch up. Jesus, Vanessa. I know. Does Victor know? His lawyers received the papers 2 hours ago. By now, he definitely knows. Are you okay? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, I'm terrified. I have no idea what I'm doing. I just spent the last 3 weeks trying to convince myself I could fix the marriage. Go to therapy. Make compromises. Be the wife Victor needed me to be. Her voice cracked. But I couldn't do it. I kept thinking about that art studio, about making something that mattered to me, about your face when you said being nothing was better than being trapped. Where are you staying? A hotel, downtown Phoenix. I can't go back to the house. Victor's already frozen my credit cards, cut off my access to our joint accounts. He's claiming I'm mentally unstable and making reckless decisions. Can he do that? He's doing it. Vanessa pulled her knees up to her chest, looking small despite everything she was. His lawyers are going to destroy me. They'll drag out every mistake I've ever made. Paint me as an unstable gold digger who seduced a successful man and is now trying to steal his empire. But you built that empire with him. I built it for him. There's a difference. Most of the patents are in his name. The company structure puts him as majority stakeholder. I was so focused on the work that I never protected myself legally. She wiped her eyes. I was an idiot. You were trusting someone you loved. Same thing. They sat in silence for a moment. Somewhere in the building, someone was playing music too loud. A car alarm went off in the parking lot. The normal sounds of a life that had nothing to do with billion-dollar divorces and corporate empires. Why did you come here? Ethan asked quietly. Because you're the only person who's been honest with me in years. Because I needed to hear someone tell me I'm not crazy for wanting my life back. She looked at him. Because I'm scared out of my mind, and I didn't know where else to go. Ethan thought about all the reasons he should tell her to leave. About Maya sleeping in the next room. About his own disaster of a life that couldn't handle another complication. About the target Victor Sinclair would paint on his back the second he realized Ethan wasn't going away. You can stay here tonight, he heard himself say. The couch isn't comfortable, but it's better than a hotel. I can afford a hotel. Can you? If Victor froze your accounts? Vanessa's face crumpled slightly. I have about $300 in cash and a credit card he doesn't know about. That'll last maybe a week if I'm careful. Then stay here. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Why are you helping me? It was the second time she'd asked that question. Ethan still didn't have a good answer. Because someone should, he said finally. Vanessa started crying then, not the careful, controlled tears from before. Real sobs that shook her entire body. Ethan sat beside her on the worn couch and let her fall apart, not touching her, just being present while she processed everything she'd just destroyed. I'm losing everything, she whispered between sobs. My company, my house, my reputation, everything I spent a decade building. No, you're losing everything he convinced you that you needed. There's a difference. She looked at him through tears. How are you not angry at me? I just dragged you into a nightmare. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to be here. Why? Because watching you come alive at that art studio was the first real thing I'd seen in years, and I decided that mattered more than being safe. Something shifted in Vanessa's expression then. Something that looked like hope mixed with terror, mixed with gratitude she didn't know how to express. I don't know how to do this, she said. Be alone. Start over. Build a life that's actually mine. Then we'll figure it out together. You don't owe me that. I know. They stayed up until almost 3 in the morning, talking about logistics and lawyers and what came next. Vanessa had already contacted a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset cases. The battle would be brutal and expensive, and Victor would use every weapon he had to destroy her credibility. But for the first time since Ethan had met her, Vanessa didn't look like someone who'd already given up. She looked like someone preparing to fight. The next morning, Maya woke up and found a stranger sleeping on their couch. "Daddy, who's that?" Ethan was making coffee in the kitchen, functioning on about 4 hours of sleep and too much adrenaline. "Her name's Vanessa. She's a friend who needed a place to stay." "Why?" "Because sometimes people need help." Maya studied Vanessa with the brutal honesty of a 5-year-old. "She's pretty. Is she your girlfriend?" "No." "Are you sure? Because you're making the face you make when you like someone." "What face?" "The worried face. You always look worried about people you care about." Ethan had no response to that. Vanessa woke up a few minutes later, disoriented and stiff from the uncomfortable couch. She looked around this tiny apartment like she was trying to remember where she was and how she'd gotten there. "Morning," Ethan said, handing her a cup of coffee. "Thank you." She took the mug with hands that shook slightly. Maya appeared in the doorway, staring at Vanessa with undisguised curiosity. "Hi," Vanessa said. "You must be Maya." "How do you know my name?" "Your dad told me about you." "Did he tell you we're poor?" "Maya," Ethan said sharply. "What?" "We are. You say so all the time." Vanessa's expression softened. "There's nothing wrong with that." "Daddy says there is. He says that's why we can't have nice things." Ethan felt his face burn with embarrassment. "Maya, go get dressed. We're going to Grandma's today." "But I don't want to go to Grandma's." "Now!" Maya huffed and disappeared back into her room. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "She doesn't have a filter yet." "Don't apologize. She's right." Vanessa stared down at her coffee. "I've spent so long not thinking about money that I forgot what it's like for most people. What it's like for you." "We're fine." "You're not fine. You're drowning. And I showed up last night adding more weight." "I told you to stay. That was my choice." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "When this divorce is over, if I get any kind of settlement, I want to help you. Pay off your medical bills, get Maya into a better school, help you actually build something instead of just surviving." "I don't want your money." "Why not?" "Because that's not why I'm helping you." "Then why are you?" Ethan met her eyes. "Because you deserve better than what you had. That's it. That's the only reason." Something in Vanessa's face shifted. She set down her coffee and stood, crossing the small living room until she was directly in front of him. "No one has ever just wanted me to be okay before," she said quietly. "Everyone always wants something, money or access or connections or sex. But you just want me to be okay." "Yeah. That's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me." Before Ethan could respond, she kissed him. It wasn't dramatic or passionate or anything like the movies made it seem. It was desperate and grateful and terrified all at once. Her hands gripped his shirt like she was afraid he'd disappear. His hands hovered uncertainly near her shoulders, not quite touching, not quite pulling away. When they broke apart, they both looked stunned. "I shouldn't have done that," Vanessa said. "Probably not." "Your daughter is in the next room." "Yeah. And I'm still technically married." "That too." They stared at each other, breathing hard, the space between them charged with something neither of them knew how to name. "I'm falling in love with you," Vanessa whispered, "and I don't know how to stop." Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. "Then don't." "That's insane. We barely know each other. I'm in the middle of a divorce that's going to destroy my reputation. You're a single father barely making ends meet. This is the worst possible timing for anything. When's the right time?" "Never. There is no right time for this." "Then we might as well do it anyway." Vanessa laughed, but it sounded like crying. "You're going to get hurt. Victor's going to make sure of that." "Let him try." "I'm serious, Ethan. He'll come after you, your job, your daughter. He'll find every vulnerability you have and exploit it." "I know." "And you're still not walking away?" "No." She kissed him again, harder this time, like she was trying to convince herself this was real. When Maya's door opened, they jumped apart like guilty teenagers. "Are you guys done being weird?" Maya asked. "Yeah," Ethan said. "We're done." But they weren't, not even close. The story hit the news 3 days later. Billionaire CEO Vanessa Sinclair. Files for divorce amid rumors of affair with single father. The article had everything. Photos of Vanessa leaving Ethan's apartment building, speculation about their relationship, quotes from unnamed sources claiming she'd been behaving erratically for months, Victor's carefully worded statement expressing concern for his wife's mental health and hoping she'd get the help she needed. Ethan's phone started ringing off the hook. Reporters, former coworkers, people he hadn't talked to in years suddenly wanting his side of the story. He ignored all of it. Vanessa called from her hotel room, voice shaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have known they'd find out. Victor must have had someone following me." "It's fine." "It's not fine. They're dragging your name through the mud, calling you a gold digger and a homewrecker. Your life is about to become hell." "My life was already hell. At least now it's interesting." "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." She was quiet for a moment. "I rented an art studio in Mesa. Not the community space, an actual private studio with windows and light and space to work. I signed a 6-month lease this morning." "That's good." "Victor's lawyers are going to use it against me. Say I'm being reckless with marital assets, prove I'm mentally unstable." "Are you?" "Probably, but I don't care anymore." Ethan smiled despite everything. "Good. Will you come see it, the studio?" "When?" "Now. Right now. I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy for doing this." "You're absolutely crazy, but that doesn't mean you're wrong." That's exactly what I needed to hear. The studio was perfect. It sat on the second floor of an old brick building with huge windows overlooking Main Street, exposed beams, concrete floors, enough space for multiple work tables and storage for clay and tools. Empty now except for the light pouring through those massive windows. Vanessa stood in the middle of it all, covered in dust from cleaning, looking more alive than Ethan had ever seen her. "It's too much, isn't it?" she asked. "I should have started smaller. This is going to cost a fortune to heat and cool and stock with supplies." "It's perfect." "You're just saying that." "I don't just say things." She turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd met her, Vanessa Sinclair looked free. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Of Victor, of losing everything, of failing at this and proving everyone right that I was better off staying where I was." "You probably will fail," Ethan said. "At least at first. That's how creating anything works. You suck at it until you don't." "That's not very encouraging." "I'm not here to encourage you. I'm here to tell you the truth." She crossed the empty studio and stood in front of him, dust in her hair, paint stains already forming on her jeans. "If I lose everything in this divorce," she said quietly, "will you still stay?" It was the question she'd asked before, in different words, the question that mattered more than anything else. Ethan thought about his tiny apartment, about Maya, about the target painted on his back and the life that was about to get infinitely more complicated. He thought about Vanessa in that parking garage, destroyed, about her at the art studio, coming alive, about the mechanical smile at the gala and the real one she wore now. "Yes," he said. She kissed him then, properly this time, without hesitation or fear. His hands found her waist. Her fingers tangled in his hair. They stumbled backward until her back hit the wall, and they were pressed together in the empty studio with sunlight streaming through windows and dust motes dancing in the air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vanessa was smiling. "I love you," she said. It should have been too soon, too fast, too complicated. But Ethan looked at her and realized he'd known for weeks. Maybe since the moment she'd refused to perform for him at the gala. Maybe since that first coffee shop when she admitted she didn't know how to be honest. "I love you too." They spent the rest of the afternoon in that studio, planning and dreaming and pretending for a few hours that the rest of the world didn't exist. But it did exist, and Victor Sinclair was about to make sure they never forgot it. The campaign started small at first. A leaked email here suggesting Vanessa had been seeing multiple therapists for anxiety and depression. An anonymous source there claiming she'd become increasingly paranoid and erratic in board meetings. Photos of her leaving Ethan's apartment at odd hours with captions speculating about substance abuse and mental breakdowns. Victor wasn't loud about it. He didn't need to be. He just planted seeds and let the media ecosystem do the rest. Within 2 weeks, Vanessa Sinclair went from respected tech CEO to cautionary tale about successful women having midlife crises. Think pieces appeared analyzing her psychological state. Former colleagues gave carefully worded interviews expressing concern. The company's stock dipped 3%, and suddenly she wasn't just destroying her marriage, she was threatening shareholder value. Ethan watched it happen from the outside, helpless and furious. "They're calling me unhinged," Vanessa said one night, sitting on the floor of her studio surrounded by half-finished sculptures. She'd been working for 8 hours straight, clay caked under her fingernails, hair tied back with what looked like a shoelace. "There's a whole Reddit thread analyzing my social media posts for signs of instability. Stop reading that garbage." "I can't. I need to know what they're saying." She looked up at him with exhausted eyes. "Victor's lawyers are building a narrative. Every decision I make gets twisted into evidence that I'm not mentally competent to handle divorce proceedings or business decisions." "What does your lawyer say?" "That we need to be patient, document everything, build our own case." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "But patience doesn't stop people from treating me like I'm one bad day away from a psychiatric hold." Ethan sat down beside her on the dusty floor. "You know it's all bullshit, right? Victor's just scared you're actually leaving. If he's scared, he's hiding it well. His lawyers filed a motion yesterday claiming I'm dissipating marital assets, the studio rental, clay supplies, even the coffee I buy on the way here. They're cataloging everything as evidence of reckless spending and impaired judgment. Can they do that?" "They're doing it." She picked up a lump of clay and squeezed it hard. "And the worst part is some of my old friends believe it. I got a call from my college roommate yesterday asking if I was okay. Not because she cared, because she'd read an article and wanted gossip." "What'd you tell her?" I hung up. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Mesa was settling into evening. Streetlights flickered on. Cars passed. Normal people living normal lives that didn't involve character assassination and billion-dollar divorces. "I'm thinking about stepping down from the company," Vanessa said quietly. Ethan turned to look at her. "What?" "Victor wants me out anyway. He's been working the board behind my scenes, suggesting I need time away to focus on my health. If I resign voluntarily, it might take some ammunition away from his lawyers. Or it proves you're unstable like he's claiming. Either way, I lose. At least this way I lose on my terms." "That's not losing. That's surrender." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the pressure, Ethan. Every decision I make gets scrutinized. Every time I defend myself, it looks defensive. Every time I try to explain, it sounds like excuses. Victor has spent months building this narrative, and now it's everywhere. People I've worked with for years look at me like I'm broken. So prove them wrong." "How?" "By staying calm while they dismantle my reputation? By acting perfectly stable while my ex-husband destroys everything I built?" Her voice cracked. "I'm so tired of fighting. Maybe he's right. Maybe I should just take whatever settlement he offers and disappear." "You don't mean that." "Don't I? What's the alternative? Spend the next 2 years in court while he bleeds me dry with legal fees? Watch him turn everyone against me? Lose my company, my money, my credibility, everything except this studio and a relationship with you that half the world thinks is pathological?" The words hung between them, sharp and true. Ethan didn't have a good answer, because she was right. Victor had the resources, the connections, the carefully constructed public image. He could drag this out indefinitely, making Vanessa's life hell while barely inconveniencing his own. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said after a moment. "I shouldn't have said that. About us." "You're not wrong, though. Everyone thinks you're having a breakdown and I'm either taking advantage or incredibly stupid. Which one are you?" "Probably both." She almost smiled. Almost. "Why are you still here, Ethan? Really? You could walk away right now and your life would go back to normal. Boring and safe and uncomplicated." Ethan thought about that. About his tiny apartment and his daughter and the simple, forgettable life he'd lived before Vanessa Sinclair asked him to take her somewhere private at a charity gala. "I don't want safe anymore," he said finally. I spent 3 years in survival mode after my ex left, just trying to get through each day without thinking too hard about what it all meant. And then I met you, and for the first time in forever, something actually mattered. You matter. What we're building matters, and I'm not walking away from that just because it's hard. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Even if it destroys you, even then. She leaned against him, clay-covered and exhausted, and they sat together on the floor while the studio filled with shadows. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Be the person everyone thinks is crazy while staying sane enough to prove them wrong. Then don't prove them wrong. Just live your life, make your art, let them think whatever they want. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one being torn apart in public. No, I'm just the guy dating the woman being torn apart in public, which means I get all the judgment and none of the money. She laughed despite herself. That's a terrible deal. Yeah, well, I'm not great at negotiations. They stayed in the studio until almost midnight, Vanessa working on a new piece while Ethan sat nearby reading articles on his phone about why men who date recently divorced wealthy women are either con artists or idiots. The consensus seemed to be he was both. When they finally left, Vanessa's hands were cramping from hours of shaping clay, and Ethan's back hurt from sitting on concrete. They looked like disaster victims. They felt like it too. But when Vanessa locked the studio door behind them, she was smiling. Thank you, she said. For what? For not trying to fix it. For just sitting with me while everything falls apart. That's a low bar. It's higher than you think. The legal battle got uglier. Victor's lawyers filed a motion for emergency financial relief, claiming Vanessa was deliberately spending down marital assets to spite him. They presented evidence of the studio rental, art supplies, even meals she'd bought at restaurants near Ethan's apartment. Everything meticulously documented and framed as reckless, vindictive behavior. Vanessa's lawyer countered with evidence of Victor's controlling behavior. The location tracking, the monitored emails, the systematic isolation from friends and family over the course of their marriage. It should have been damning. But Victor's team was better. They had psychiatric experts ready to testify that monitoring a spouse with anxiety and depression was appropriate spousal concern, not abuse. They had business partners who'd swear Vanessa had been increasingly erratic in meetings. They had photos of her looking disheveled outside her studio, accompanied by speculation about drug use and mental decline. They're destroying me, Vanessa said after a particularly brutal day of depositions. She'd come straight to Ethan's apartment, still wearing the conservative suit her lawyer had insisted on, makeup smeared from crying in the courthouse bathroom. Victor's lawyer spent 4 hours asking about my mental health history, every therapy session I've ever attended, every medication I've tried for anxiety, every moment I've ever struggled with anything. Maya was at her grandmother's, so Ethan could focus entirely on Vanessa, who looked like she might shatter at any second. They made it sound like wanting to make art was a symptom of mania, she continued, like leaving my marriage was impulsive self-destruction instead of self-preservation. And the worst part is, I could see the judge buying it. Every answer I gave sounded defensive. Every explanation sounded like rationalization. What does your lawyer think? That we're in trouble. Victor's narrative is cleaner. He's the concerned husband trying to protect his unstable wife from herself. I'm the irrational woman throwing away a good marriage for a midlife crisis and an affair. It's not an affair. You filed for divorce. Tell that to the media. They're still running headlines about the billionaire CEO and her boy toy. Ethan flinched. He'd seen those headlines. They called him everything from opportunist to predator to sad divorced dad looking for a meal ticket. His coworkers had stopped talking to him. His boss had pulled him aside to ask if the negative attention was affecting his sales numbers. Even Maya's school had called with concerns about the articles mentioning his daughter. I should have been more careful, Vanessa said quietly. I should have waited until the divorce was final before dragging you into this. I dragged myself into this. You didn't know what you were getting into. Neither did you. She looked at him then, really looked at him, like she was trying to memorize his face before everything collapsed. If I lose everything, she said, and I mean everything, the company, the settlement, even this studio, will you still think I made the right choice? It was a version of the same question she kept asking in different ways, the question that mattered more than all the lawyers and headlines and public opinion combined. Yeah, Ethan said, because you're not the same person I met at that gala. That person was already gone. This version of you, covered in clay and fighting for something real, that's who you actually are. And losing money doesn't change that. Easy to say when you've never had money to lose. You're right, but I've lost other things. My marriage, my self-respect, years of my life to survival mode and quiet desperation. And I can tell you that holding on to something that's already dead just makes the death last longer. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and started pacing the small living room, heels clicking on the cheap linoleum. Victor's team offered a settlement today, she said. I'd get $5 million. No stake in the company. No claim to any intellectual property. I'd have to sign an NDA about the marriage and agree not to disparage him publicly. That's insulting. You helped build that company from nothing. I know, but my lawyer thinks we should consider it. Trials are expensive and unpredictable. If the judge sides with Victor's mental health narrative, I could end up with even less. This way, I'd have enough to start over. Live comfortably, keep the studio. Is that what you want? I don't know. Part of me just wants this over. I'm so tired of fighting, of being painted as the villain in my own life story, of watching everything I built get twisted into evidence that I'm incompetent. She stopped pacing and looked at Ethan with exhausted eyes. What would you do? I'd tell him to shove his $5 million up his ass and fight for what's actually yours. Even if I lose? Even then. Because at least you'd know you didn't give up. Vanessa stood there for a long moment, processing. Then, slowly, something shifted in her expression. The exhaustion didn't disappear, but something harder emerged underneath it. You're right, she said quietly. I helped build that company. I wrote code. I developed products. I sacrificed years of my life and my art and my sanity for that business. And he doesn't get to erase that just because he's better at playing victim. So what are you going to do? I'm going to reject the settlement, and then I'm going to fight like hell. She said it like a promise, like a threat, like someone who'd finally remembered she was allowed to be angry. Ethan smiled. There she is. Who? The woman who walked away from a billionaire at a gala because she was done pretending. Vanessa crossed the room and kissed him hard, like she was trying to draw strength from the contact. When they broke apart, she was breathing heavy, mascara smudged, looking fierce and terrified and completely alive. This is going to get worse before it gets better, she said. I know. Victor's going to come after you next, your job, your custody of Maya, anything he can use as leverage. Let him try. I'm serious, Ethan. He'll make your life hell. My life was already hell. At least now it's hell with you in it. She laughed, but it sounded like crying. That's the worst romantic declaration I've ever heard. I'm not romantic, I'm honest. I know. That's why I love you. They spent that night tangled together on Ethan's worn couch, talking about strategy and worst-case scenarios, and what they'd do if everything fell apart. It wasn't romantic or dramatic or anything like the movies made it seem. It was two scared people choosing each other despite every rational reason not to. By morning, Vanessa had made her decision. She called her lawyer and rejected Victor's settlement offer. The war was officially on. Victor's response came fast and brutal. Within a week, he'd filed a countersuit claiming Vanessa had breached fiduciary duty to the company by misusing corporate resources for personal projects. He alleged she'd been planning her exit for months, deliberately sabotaging products and relationships to damage his reputation. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than the narrative. Business publications ran stories about the bitter divorce threatening a billion-dollar tech empire. Investors started making noise about stability and leadership. The board called an emergency meeting to discuss Vanessa's future with the company. She attended that meeting with her lawyer and a folder full of documented evidence of her contributions. She gave a presentation outlining every product she'd developed, every partnership she'd negotiated, every crisis she'd navigated while Victor took credit. It didn't matter. The board voted to place her on indefinite administrative leave pending the outcome of the divorce proceedings. They claimed it was to protect the company's interests. Really, it was Victor's final move to push her out of the business they'd built together. Vanessa walked out of that boardroom with her head high and her hands shaking. She drove straight to Ethan's apartment and collapsed on his couch. It's done, she said. I'm out. I'm sorry. Don't be. I knew it was coming. Victor's been working the board for months. This was inevitable. But her voice was hollow, defeated, like something essential had finally broken. Ethan sat beside her, not touching, just present. "What now?" he asked. "Now I finish this divorce. Take whatever settlement I can get. Try to rebuild something from the wreckage." "And the studio?" "I don't know. Maybe that was stupid too. Maybe Victor was right, and I was just having a breakdown." "You don't believe that." "Don't I? Look at what it cost. My company, my reputation, years of work, all because I wanted to make art and be honest about my marriage." "You didn't lose those things because you wanted to make art. You lost them because Victor would rather destroy everything than let you be free." Vanessa looked at him with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. What if he's right, though? What if I am unstable? What if leaving was the biggest mistake of my life? "Then you made a mistake. So what? At least it was yours." She started crying then. Not the quiet, controlled tears from before. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal and broken. Ethan held her while she fell apart completely, feeling her shake against him, wishing he could fix this and knowing he couldn't. All he could do was stay. Hours later, when the crying finally stopped and exhaustion set in, Vanessa pulled back and wiped her face with her sleeve. "I need to show you something," she said. She led him to her car and pulled out a large portfolio case. Inside were photos of sculptures she'd been working on over the past month. Abstract pieces that looked like they'd been ripped from her chest, raw and jagged and desperately beautiful. "I've been documenting everything," she explained. "Every piece, every session, building a body of work. These are incredible. They're angry and sad and probably too honest. That's why they're incredible." Vanessa stared at the photos like she was seeing them for the first time. "I'm thinking about having a show," she said quietly. "Nothing fancy, just the studio. Invite people. Show them what I've been making while my life fell apart." "When?" "I don't know. Maybe after the divorce is final. Maybe sooner. Part of me wants to wait until I'm in a better place emotionally, but another part thinks that's the whole point. To show people that falling apart doesn't mean you stop creating." "Do it," Ethan said. "Stop waiting for permission or the right moment. Just do it." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "Will you help me? Plan it? Set it up?" "I don't know the first thing about organizing an art show." "Neither do I." "Perfect. We'll figure it out together." And just like that, they had a plan, something to build toward instead of just surviving the wreckage. The divorce proceedings dragged on for another 6 weeks. More depositions, more financial discovery, more headlines about the bitter battle between the tech mogul and his unstable ex-wife. Victor's lawyers continued painting Vanessa as irrational and vindictive. Her lawyers fought back with evidence of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. Neither side was winning. Both sides were bleeding. Then, finally, the judge issued a ruling. The marriage would be dissolved. Vanessa would receive a settlement of $18 million, far less than she'd contributed, but more than Victor's insulting $5 million offer. She'd retain no stake in the company and no claim to intellectual property developed during the marriage. Victor would keep the house, the cars, and the carefully constructed public image. It was over. Not fairly, not justly, but over. Vanessa signed the papers in her lawyer's office with hands that barely shook. She walked out of that building into the Phoenix afternoon sunshine, feeling lighter and emptier at the same time. She called Ethan from her car. "It's done." "How do you feel?" "Like I just escaped something that was slowly killing me, and like I lost everything I spent a decade building." "Both can be true." "I know." There was a long pause. "I'm setting the date for the show," Vanessa said. 3 weeks from now, at the studio. I want to do it before I lose my nerve. I'll help however I can. Thank you for everything, for staying when you should have run, for believing me when everyone else thought I was crazy. You're not crazy. You're just done pretending. Same thing, according to most people. Then most people are idiots. She laughed, a real laugh, the first one in weeks. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." And for the first time since this whole disaster started, Ethan believed they might actually survive it. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and doubt. Vanessa worked 16-hour days in the studio, finishing pieces and second-guessing every decision. Ethan helped where he could, hanging lights and moving sculptures and reminding her to eat when she forgot. Maya came by twice, declared the art weird but cool, and asked if Vanessa was going to live with them now. Neither of them had a good answer to that question. The invitation list for the show was small: Ruth from Desert Clay Studio, a few artists Vanessa had met during open sculpting sessions, Dennis from Ethan's office, who'd never seen real art outside a museum, Vanessa's divorce lawyer, who'd become something close to a friend through the nightmare of the past months, and a handful of former colleagues who'd reached out quietly after the divorce was finalized, saying they'd always known Victor was controlling but hadn't known how to help. No reporters, no media, no one from her old life who'd sided with Victor's version of events. "This feels too small," Vanessa said the night before the opening, staring at the studio space filled with her work. "Like I'm hiding instead of making a statement." "You are hiding," Ethan said, "but from the right things. All those people who wanted you to fail or wanted gossip or wanted to profit from your disaster. You're not hiding from yourself anymore." "When did you become wise?" "I'm not wise. I just pay attention." She walked through the space one more time, touching each piece like she needed to confirm they were real. The sculptures ranged from abstract forms that looked like screaming to delicate structures that seemed ready to collapse at any moment. Every single one of them was honest in a way that made Ethan's chest hurt. "What if no one comes?" Vanessa asked. "Then we'll drink the wine ourselves and call it a party." "What if they come and hate everything?" "Then they hate it. You still made it." She turned to face him, vulnerability written across her face. "I'm terrified." "I know." "Not of the show. Of what comes after. I've spent the last few months fighting and destroying and rebuilding. But once this is over, I have to figure out what kind of life I actually want, and I have no idea what that looks like." Ethan crossed the studio and took her hands, clay-stained and calloused from weeks of work. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. "No pressure, no timeline, just forward." "That's terrifyingly vague." "Welcome to freedom." She kissed him then, soft and grateful, before pulling back to adjust one of the sculptures that didn't need adjusting. "Go home," she said. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long." "Are you staying here tonight?" "Yeah. I need to sit with all of this. Make sure I'm ready." "You're ready." "How do you know?" "Because you're still scared. If you weren't scared, it wouldn't matter." Ethan left her there, surrounded by pieces of herself made visible, and drove home through the quiet Phoenix streets wondering when exactly he'd fallen completely in love with someone so catastrophically out of his league. The answer was probably the moment he'd met her. He just hadn't admitted it until now. The opening was supposed to start at 7. By 6:30, Vanessa was convinced no one would come. By 6:45, Ruth arrived with flowers and a bottle of cheap champagne. By 7, Dennis showed up with 3 coworkers who'd gotten curious about Ethan's dramatic personal life. By 7:15, the studio was full, not packed, not overflowing, but full enough that it felt real. People moved through the space quietly, studying the sculptures with the kind of attention Vanessa had forgotten existed. A woman in her 40s stood in front of one piece for 10 minutes, tears running down her face. A college student took photos and asked detailed questions about technique. Ruth pulled Vanessa aside to tell her this was some of the most honest work she'd seen in decades. "I thought it would feel more dramatic," Vanessa admitted, watching people interact with her art, "like some kind of grand statement, but it just feels quiet." "That's because it's real," Ruth said. "Real doesn't perform. It just exists." Ethan stood near the back with Maya, who'd insisted on coming despite it being a school night. She wore a dress she'd picked out herself and was currently explaining to a confused gallery goer why one of the sculptures looked like a sad tornado. "That's my daughter," Ethan said to no one in particular. "She's right, though," Vanessa said, appearing beside him. "That piece was about chaos. She saw it immediately." "Kids are honest. They don't know how to pretend yet. I'm learning that from you." Maya spotted them talking and ran over, grabbing Vanessa's hand. "Can I make art like this someday?" You can make art like whatever you want, Vanessa said. Will you teach me? Vanessa glanced at Ethan, something uncertain in her expression. Teaching his daughter meant being part of their life long term, meant commitment and complications and all the things they'd been carefully not discussing. If your dad's okay with it, Vanessa said carefully. Maya turned to Ethan with pleading eyes. Please? I want to learn how to make sad tornadoes. We'll figure it out, Ethan said, which seemed to satisfy Maya enough to run off and examine another sculpture. Are we really doing this? Vanessa asked quietly. Building a life together? You and me and Maya? I think we already are. That's insane. We barely know each other. You live in a tiny apartment. I'm technically unemployed. We have no plan. So? So that's not how adults build relationships. Maybe that's the problem with how adults do things. Vanessa laughed, but it sounded nervous. I have $18 million from the divorce. I could buy a house, a real house with space and stability. Would you and Maya want to? She stopped, realizing what she was suggesting. Sorry, that's too fast. Too much. I'm not trying to buy my way into your life. I know. It's just, I keep thinking about futures and possibilities and what it might look like if we actually tried to build something real instead of just surviving disasters together. Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching Maya interrogate another gallery visitor about whether they liked the art or were just being polite. Ask me again in 6 months, he said finally, when the divorce dust settles and you've had time to figure out who you actually are outside of Victor's shadow. If you still want us then, we'll talk about houses and futures and all the terrifying permanent things. What if I want those things now? Then you're still running from one life into another instead of building your own first. Vanessa flinched but didn't argue, because he was right. She'd spent so many years being Victor's wife and the company's CEO that she'd never learned how to just be Vanessa. That's frustrating advice, she said. I'm not advice, I'm honest. Same thing sometimes. Not even close. They stood together watching people move through her work, and Vanessa realized something she'd been avoiding for weeks. This wasn't the ending of her story. It was barely the beginning. Everything that came next would be harder and slower and far less dramatic than the divorce and the headlines and the public destruction. It would be the quiet, difficult work of figuring out who she was when no one was watching. The show ran until almost 11. By the end, Vanessa had sold 3 pieces, been offered a spot in a group exhibition downtown, and received enough genuine compliments that she was starting to believe this might actually be something she could build a life around. After everyone left and they'd cleaned up the wine glasses and straightened the furniture, Vanessa sat on the floor of the empty studio and cried. Not from sadness, from relief, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming realization that she'd done something entirely for herself and it hadn't destroyed her. Ethan sat beside her, not saying anything, just being present while she processed. I think I'm going to be okay, she said eventually. I know. How? Because you're still here, still working, still choosing the hard thing instead of the easy lie. The hard thing sucks. Yeah, but it's yours. They locked up the studio near midnight and stood outside in the cool desert air. Phoenix spread out below them, all lights and possibility, and the promise of a tomorrow that wasn't predetermined. Thank you, Vanessa said, for everything. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for staying when everyone else left, for being honest even when it hurt. You're welcome. That's it? Just you're welcome? What do you want me to say? That I'm noble or selfless or some kind of hero? I'm not. I just recognized someone who was drowning because I'd been drowning too, and I decided that mattered more than being safe. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. I'm going to find my own place, she said. Something small, nothing fancy. I need space to figure out who I am when I'm not performing or fighting or hiding. Good. And I'm going to keep making art. Maybe teach some classes. Build something that's actually mine instead of something I share with someone else's vision. Also good. And I want to keep seeing you, but slowly, without pressure or expectations or trying to force something just because we survived a disaster together. That's probably smart. You're not upset? Why would I be upset? You're finally choosing yourself. That's what I've been telling you to do for months. She kissed him then, slow and careful, like she was memorizing the moment. I love you, she said, but I need to learn how to love myself first. I know. You're really okay with that? Yeah, because I'd rather have you whole in 6 months than broken forever. Vanessa laughed, but it sounded like crying. You're annoyingly mature about this. I'm really not. I'm just old enough to know that rushing into someone else's life to escape your own never ends well. They stood there for another moment, neither quite ready to leave, but both knowing they needed to. I'll call you, Vanessa said. I know you will. How are you so sure? Because you're not running anymore. You're just walking forward, and forward includes me. She smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and looked nothing like the mechanical performance she'd worn at that gala months ago. Then she got in her car and drove away, and Ethan stood alone in the parking lot feeling like something essential had shifted, even though nothing had technically changed. 6 months later, almost to the day, Vanessa called and asked if he and Maya wanted to see her new place. It was a modest loft in downtown Phoenix with huge windows and exposed brick and enough space for both living and creating. Not a mansion, not a penthouse, just a home that felt like her. Maya ran through the space immediately, declaring the bedroom way better than ours and asking if they were moving in. Not yet, Vanessa said, glancing at Ethan, but maybe someday, if your dad's okay with it. Are you? Ethan asked. Okay with someday? I think so. I'm still figuring things out. Still teaching classes and making art and learning how to exist without someone controlling every decision. But I'm happy, actually happy, and I want you to be part of that. What does that look like? I don't know exactly. Dating properly instead of hiding from disasters together. Building something intentional instead of just surviving. Letting Maya teach me how to be honest the way you taught me to stop performing. Maya, overhearing this, appeared in the doorway. I can teach you lots of things, like how to make friendship bracelets and why vegetables are disgusting. Vegetables aren't disgusting, Ethan corrected. See, this is what I'm talking about. You need someone on your side. Vanessa laughed, and the sound filled the empty loft with something that felt like possibility. They spent the afternoon there, eating takeout on the floor because Vanessa didn't have furniture yet, talking about the future in vague, hopeful terms that didn't feel suffocating or predetermined. Ethan watched Vanessa interact with Maya, patient and uncertain, and trying so hard to get it right, and realized something he'd been avoiding for months. This wasn't a relationship built on desperation or rebellion or two broken people clinging to each other in a storm. It was two people who'd done the hard work of becoming whole separately, choosing to build something together because they wanted to, not because they needed to. And that made all the difference. What are you thinking about? Vanessa asked, noticing him staring. That we're going to be okay. All of us? Yeah, all of us. Maya looked up from her phone. Are we a family now? It was the question they'd all been dancing around, the one that felt too big and permanent and terrifying to answer directly. Ethan glanced at Vanessa, who looked back with the same uncertainty and hope. We're getting there, Vanessa said carefully. If that's what everyone wants. I want it, Maya said immediately. Vanessa's cool and she has big windows. Those are your criteria? Cool and big windows? Also, she doesn't lie to me. You said honesty matters. Ethan had no response to that. Vanessa stood and walked to the window, staring out at the Phoenix skyline. I'm not perfect at this. I'm still learning how to be in a relationship without losing myself. How to let people in without giving everything away. How to build something stable after years of chaos. We've got time, Ethan said. No rush. What if I mess it up? What if I'm too damaged or too difficult or too... Then you mess it up, and we figure it out. That's how this works. She turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd met her, Vanessa Sinclair looked completely unguarded. No mask, no performance. Just a woman who'd survived her own destruction and was slowly learning how to build something real from the pieces. Okay, she said, let's try. Nearly a year after the night they first met, Ethan and Vanessa returned to the Sinclair Foundation annual charity gala. Not because Victor had invited them. He was there, of course, with his new, carefully curated girlfriend and his perfectly maintained public image. But Vanessa had been invited by the new board, who'd quietly started respecting her contributions after the dust settled, and the truth about Victor's controlling behavior became impossible to ignore. Walking back into the Biltmore estate felt surreal. The same string lights, the same luxury cars, the same elegant crowd pretending their lives were perfect. But everything was different now. Vanessa wore a dress she'd chosen herself, simple and elegant without being performative. Her hair was down. Her jewelry was minimal. She looked like someone who'd stopped needing external validation and started trusting her own judgment. Ethan wore the same borrowed suit from Dennis, still slightly too tight in the shoulders, still obviously out of place among the wealth. But he didn't care anymore. Neither did Vanessa. Maya was with her grandmother for the evening, disappointed to miss the fancy party, but pacified by promises of details later. They walked through the ballroom together, heads high, ignoring the whispers and stares. Victor was holding court near the bar, surrounded by investors and admirers. He saw them enter, and his expression flickered for just a moment. Not anger. Something closer to discomfort. The reminder that he hadn't actually won, he'd just been better at controlling the narrative. Vanessa didn't approach him. Didn't need to. She'd already won the only battle that mattered. The one for herself. "You okay?" Ethan asked as they found a quiet corner near the terrace where they'd first talked. "Yeah, I thought coming back here would feel heavier, like facing a ghost or something, but it just feels distant, like watching a movie about someone else's life." "That's because it was someone else's life. You're different now. So are you." "Not really. I'm still broke, still working the same job, still living in that tiny apartment." "But you're not surviving anymore. You're living. There's a difference." Ethan thought about that. She was right. Somewhere in the chaos of the past year, he'd stopped measuring his life by what he lacked and started measuring it by what actually mattered. His daughter. His integrity. The woman standing beside him who'd chosen the hard path instead of the easy lie. "Dance with me," Vanessa said suddenly. "I don't dance." "Neither do I. Let's be terrible at it together." They moved on to the dance floor, surrounded by couples who actually knew what they were doing, and swayed awkwardly to music neither of them was really hearing. "People are staring," Ethan noted. "Let them. I'm done performing for strangers." "What about for me?" "You don't want a performance. You want the truth." "Yeah, I do." She leaned her head against his shoulder and they danced badly in the middle of the glamorous crowd. And Ethan realized something fundamental about the entire bizarre journey they'd been on. Their relationship had never been about scandal or temptation or rebelling against expectations. It had been about restraint, about telling the truth when lies would have been easier, about staying when leaving would have been safer, about two people choosing each other not because they needed rescuing, but because they recognized something real in the middle of all the performance and pretense. "What are you thinking about?" Vanessa asked. "That I'm glad I said no that first night." "On the terrace?" "Yeah. If I'd said yes, we would have had one night in a lifetime of regret. This way we got something actually worth keeping." Vanessa pulled back to look at him, eyes bright. "You think this is worth keeping? Don't you?" "Yeah, I really do." The music shifted to something slower. Victor and his girlfriend danced past them, perfect and polished and hollow. Vanessa didn't even glance in their direction. "I'm thinking about proposing to you," Ethan said suddenly. Vanessa stopped dancing. "What?" "Not now, maybe not for a while, but eventually, when we're both ready and it's not about escaping anything or proving anything, just about choosing each other because we want to." That's the least romantic proposal discussion I've ever heard. "I'm not romantic. I'm honest." "I know. That's why I love you." They stood in the middle of the dance floor while elegant couples swirled around them, and Vanessa Sinclair kissed Ethan Cole like he was the only real thing in a room full of expensive illusions. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "Ask me again in a year," Vanessa said. "When we've built more life together, and I've proven I can be happy without needing saving." "What if you're not ready in a year?" "Then ask me in 2 years, or 3. I'm not going anywhere." "How do you know?" "Because I've already left everyone who wanted to change me. You're the one who wanted me to stay myself. That's not something you walk away from." They left the gala early, before dessert and speeches, and all the performative charity that would accomplish very little. They drove back to Phoenix with the windows down and the night air rushing through the car, and the certain knowledge that everything ahead would be complicated and difficult and absolutely worth it. Because that's what real love looked like. Not perfect, not easy, not the fairy tale version sold in movies and magazines. Just two people who'd done the hard work of becoming whole on their own, choosing to build something together, not because they needed each other, but because they wanted to. And that made all the difference. Ethan thought about his daughter asleep at her grandmother's house, about the tiny apartment that felt less like a prison now, about the woman beside him who'd walked away from billions to find herself. He thought about the years of quiet desperation that had led him to that gala, convinced his life was already over at 32. He'd been wrong about so many things, but he'd been right about one. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is tell a desperate person the truth, because the truth doesn't save you. It just shows you that you were never as broken as you thought. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it shows you that the person standing beside you in the wreckage is exactly the one you were meant to find. Vanessa reached over and squeezed his hand as they drove through the Phoenix night, and Ethan realized he wasn't afraid anymore. Not of poverty or judgment or the future or any of the things that had kept him small for so long. He was just alive. Finally, honestly, completely alive. And so was she.